Hi folks, hello. Now today we are going to do a practical experiment on the performance of a cast iron Dutch oven versus a stainless steel Dutch oven. And what I've got here is a 28 centimeter stove called La Cocotte Dutch oven and a 24 centimeter Demeyere Atlantis Dutch oven. Now even though they are of different official measurements, the bottom diameter of both pieces are approximately the same, and in fact, the bottom diameter of the Atlantis is even about maybe 1 centimeter larger than the bottom diameter of the stove. Now, previously, I've done a few videos on various, stainless steel Dutch ovens, cast iron Dutch ovens, and also the stainless steel Dutch oven. I even did a video comparing the theoretical technicalities of both pieces. I'll link that down below. But the experiment we're going to do today is something more practical. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to cook pasta sauce in each of these vessels and look at how even the bubbling develops on the pasta sauce. Okay, in other words, are we going to get edge-to-edge uniform bubbling in the stove cast iron, and are we going to get edge-to-edge uniform bubbling in the Demeyere Atlantis stainless steel, or how well do these pans perform in that regards? Okay, so let's get the experiment started. Actually, before we start, let's have a quick look at the previous experiment that we did a little while ago, comparing the heat distribution between the same Demeyere Atlantis pan and a Le Creuset Dutch oven. Now, in this experiment, I've got a stove, but before it was Le Creuset, but it's it's cast iron, so the results should still be representative. Now, theoretically, as you can see here, the Atlantis with a copper disc bottom performs much better than the Le Creuset. If you look at the temperature difference after a period of time between the center and the edge, for the Atlantis, which is less than 10 degrees, but it's much bigger for the Le Creuset. But again, this was a more theoretical experiment. There was no food in the pan. There was only a bit of oil in the pan. Okay, so today the experiment we're going to do is a more practical experiment. Right, for our pasta sauce, we're gonna do a sofrito, carrots, celery, onions, and a bottle of this passata. So it's quite a simple, quite a standard pasta sauce. One thing I will say about pasta sauces, especially tomato-based pasta sauces, is that I don't believe there's a standard or there's a traditional recipe, okay? I think even if you ask the Italians, you ask one person, you get one answer. You ask another person, you're probably gonna get a different answer. So this is the way that I usually do it. It's quite a simple version. Sometimes I like to put in a bit of olives, bacons, anchovies, capers, whatever I feel like on the day. But so this is the way we're gonna do it for this test. This sofrito is quite a lot of it. This is actually for 2 batches, okay? So 1 batch, so half of it we're going to use for the stove, and half of it we're going to use for the Atlantis. Okay, so let's see how it goes. Right, so in goes the sofrito. We're going to gently cook this, gently sweat this for a little while, and then we're going to add the passata. Okay, we've just added the passata, the tomato passata. I've lowered the heat. So we're going to simmer this for about an hour, and let's see how even the bubbling is over the course of the next hour or so. It is now about 10 minutes into the simmering. You can see that for the most part the bubbling is quite even from the center to the outer part of the pan, but around the rim of the pan, camera's getting fogged up. Around the rim of the pan, you get about 2 to 3 centimeters, especially on this side, that does not have any bubbling at all. And on the top, there's maybe about 2 centimeters. And on this side as well, near the bottom, it seems to be quite towards the edge. So let's have a look in another 15 minutes or so. Okay, so it's been about 30 to 35 minutes since I started. And as you can see, it's and by the way, I've lowered the heat down to about 40% of the total power. And it's actually, after, well, given some time, it's performing much better. As you can see, the bubbling, it does go all the way to the edge now, for the most part. So now I'm quite happy with how it's performing. For some reason, there's actually a lack of bubbling right in the center, but otherwise it's pretty uniform across the diameter of the pan. It's been an hour, so this is where I'm gonna stop the stove. So the sauce is pretty much done. So at this point, again, very uniform bubbling across the vast majority of the pan. But there is, again, 1 or 2 centimeters around the edge, around some of the edge. So see, this part is pretty good, that there is no bubbling. So it's mostly this part. Yeah, about half the circumference has around 1 to 2 centimeters of sauce that is not bubbling. So overall, pretty good, I would say. And let's move on and see how the Atlantis does. Okay, now it's the Demeyere Atlantis' turn. We're gonna do exactly the same thing, the same method, the soffritto, the passata, and we'll check back at the same time intervals as we did for the Staub cast iron. Now it's been about 10 minutes, and as you can see with this Demeyere Atlantis, the bubbling is pretty even across the whole diameter of the pan, and you actually get bubbling right on the edge or very close to it, all the way around the pan. Now I can't lower my camera because otherwise the lens will get fogged up and you can't see anything, but hopefully you can see from this height that yeah, you do get bubbling from edge to edge. Okay, so let's check back again in a little while, and I'm just gonna lower the heat now. It's been about another 15-20 minutes, and as we can observe, the Atlantis, the Demeyere Atlantis, is performing pretty impressive. So you can see the bubbling basically right to the edge, all the way around the pan. Now for some reason I do observe that on the right hand side, from where I'm standing, it's a little bit weaker. That also happened with the stove. I think it's just the element, not the pan itself. By the element I mean the hob. So let's check back towards the end of the experiment. Okay, so this is the last bit of the experiment on the Atlantis, and as you can see, the bubbling is still very consistent from edge to edge. The sizes of the bubbles are also fairly consistent, and I think even more so when compared with the stove. So yeah, so the sauce is done, and let's do a quick conclusion of the test. Right, so what can we conclude from this little experiment? Well, the first thing I should say is that the Demeyere Atlantis, it actually came into this test with a handicap or with a disadvantage, and that is because the bottom diameter, like this, in contact with the hob, is actually about 2 centimeters larger than the bottom diameter of the stove. Okay, so this is 24 bottom diameter, and this is about 22.5, and the diameter of my electric flat top is 21.5, which means that the stove gets better coverage over the hob, and which also means that for the Atlantis, there's about 1 to 2 centimeters around the edge that's not covered by the hob. Okay, so that's already a little bit of a disadvantage for the Atlantis. Now the Demeyere Atlantis, this pan's got a 7-layer bottom construction, which I've spoken about before in my previous videos. You know, it's got that 2mm copper disc sandwiched between 2 layers of silver, and the Staub cast die is just that, it's just cast iron. Now we saw in the previous theoretical experiment that the Demeyere performed much better just by measuring the temperature differential between the center and the edge of the pan. which is expected, of course, because it contains much more conductive materials compared to cast iron. But the question is, did it actually perform better in a practical setting? Okay, so in this particular test, did it actually perform better? And the answer to that question is yes, it did perform better, but not so significantly. Okay, so two things we observed. We observed in the Atlantis that the bubbling of the pasta sauce was able to reach all the way to the edge of the pan compared to the stove. Okay, so that's a win for the Atlantis. It did slightly better in that regard, and also keeping in mind that it does have a little bit of a handicap, as just mentioned, so that makes it even more impressive. And the second thing we observed was, what I observed at least, was that the bubbling pattern throughout the duration of the test, which is throughout that hour, it was more consistent. Okay, so the bubbling was more consistent in the Atlantis than in the Staub. So the intensity of the bubbling was more consistent, and the size of the bubbles were also more consistent. So that's the conclusion with regards to the cooking performance. But a couple of other things that I should mention. Now, during the test, the handles of the stove, so the handles on the pan, and also the knob on the lid, it got very hot. Okay, so after a period of time, I was actually not able to touch the handle or the knob without an oven mitt or a towel. But as for the Demeyere Atlantis, the handles actually both on the lid and on the pan itself stayed actually quite cool. Eventually, they did get a little bit hot, but it was not hot enough that I couldn't touch it with my bare hands, so I did not need an oven mitt or a towel to touch the handles on the Atlantis. Now, another thing was that I found that it was, for the stove, it was a little bit hard to control the heat. I simmered the pasta sauce at about 40 to 50% of the heat, and whereas on the Atlantis, I had it at about 50%, and it was, the simmering was very consistent, very stable. With the stove, I noticed that I had to keep on changing it between about 40% to 50%, because at 50%, the simmering would get a little bit too violent. Let's say you get droplets of sauce jumping over the place. And when you put it down to a 40% level of the total power of the stove, it was a little bit too weak. So it was a little bit harder to manage the heat with the stove, is what I found. Anyway. And one last thing is, of course, the stove is much heavier to handle. The Atlantis weighs about 3 kilograms. The stove was more than double of the weight of the Atlantis. So overall, yes, we can say that the Atlantis, performed better, and it was more user-friendly than the stove, or in fact any cast iron oven of the Dutch oven of roughly the same size. But does it mean that you should absolutely get the Atlantis instead of the stove? Well, the answer is no, because even though the Atlantis technically won the test, the stove still performed very well. So in that regard, you should really just get what you like. If you prefer cast iron cookware and you are used to cast iron cookware, then stick with cast iron. But if you prefer stainless steel cookware, then go with a Atlantis or any high quality stainless steel pan. So you should really get what you like. Okay, so I hope that this little test has been helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.